Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today with our redistricting webinar with Senator Sharon Hewitt, who was kind enough to join us today. My name is Jessica Hester, and I'm with the St. Tammany Chamber of Commerce. And today, to start us off with our prayer and our pledge, is going to be Cheryl Scaglione with Hospice House. Cheryl, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Bow your heads in prayer, please. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. And thank you for the opportunity to come together to learn how the redistricting process is going to affect the people and businesses in St. Tammany Parish. With change often comes challenges, but also growth and opportunities. Let us look to whatever comes our way with faith and trust in your will for our lives. We also thank you for the leaders of our parish, and this morning, Senator Hewitt, who are on the front lines making sure that our community thrives. We praise you for everything you do for us and are grateful for being able to live out our freedom to follow you. In the blood of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
And everybody say the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Cheryl. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to do, so again, my name is Jessica Hester and I'm with the St. Tammany Chamber of Commerce, and we thank Senator Hewitt for joining us today to share about this very important topic. Again, this is related to the census. It happens every 10 years where we go through and redistrict based on population shifts and growth. I do want to do a couple of housekeeping things. If you have any questions during the webinar, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We will address questions at the end, but if you put them in the chat, they have a tendency to get lost. So we want to make sure you do that. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out to everyone who's registered. So look for that this afternoon, along with Senator Hewitt's slide deck that she's sharing today. I also wanted to remind everyone that Saturday, November 13th is an important election that's coming up. Early voting is happening right now and it runs through the 6th. The big issues on the ballot are going to be a 0.4 cent sales tax for the parish that's going to fund our criminal justice system. There's also 4 constitutional amendments, which are all very important to the state. And we also have 4 school board millage renewals. Senator Hewitt on her Facebook page did a wonderful presentation about the constitutional amendments. So if you're interested in that, please go check it out. And if you need more information about the sales tax, please visit Keep St. Tammany Safe. And that website will give you all the facts on it. The chamber has looked at all of these issues. We've talked to numerous people, numerous sources, spent countless hours researching all of this. And we do encourage everyone to vote yes on everything. So now I'm going to welcome Senator Hewitt, who has been working very hard on redistricting in addition to the other things that she does for us at the Capitol, to go ahead and talk about this. Thank you, Senator Hewitt.
Well, thanks so much, Jessica, and it's great to be with all of you today. I chair the Senate and Governmental Affairs Committee, which is responsible for redistricting every 10 years with our counterparts in the House. And you know, it was kind of interesting. I was at the Capitol working on this last week, and there's a hallway. Many of you who've been to the Capitol, you know this. There's kind of a hallway right outside the elevator where the governor can come down and have access to the House or the Senate chambers. And it's on the tour. If you tour the Capitol, you'll tour through this hallway and you'll see the bullet holes where Huey P. Long was shot. And the kids love that. They love putting their finger in the hole. And I heard the tour director, I'll stop and say hello to the kids. And I heard the tour director talking about that, and that the reason Dr. Carl Weiss actually shot Governor Long at that time was over redistricting. And so, you know, I kind of had one of these aha moments like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? So hopefully we won't have any crazy folks like that, but it is a really important thing that we do every 10 years. And it is something that I had asked to lead because of that. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to share my screen now and show you a number of slides that will help you understand kind of the 2020 census data, laws that govern all of this, and you know, why this is such an important thing and why it's kind of a challenge for the legislature. So let's see, let me start out by sharing my screen and we'll go through these slides and kind of give you again a big overview of the data and the challenges before us. And then I'll work with Jessica to answer your questions at the end. So first of all, you hear the term redistricting. So let's talk first about what redistricting is. So apportionment is the process of allocating the seats in a legislature. And so Congress did that recently. So we got the census numbers for the entire country, and they start allocating, let's say, congressional seats based on population. So every state has one seat in the US House of Representatives, and then the additional seats are allocated based on population. And so we've done that. Louisiana will continue to have 6 US House of Representative seats. Then districting is the process of actually drawing the lines for each of those districts. So we know we have 6 congressional seats, and now the responsibility falls to the legislature to actually draw those so that they have equal population in each of those districts. And then we will proceed with doing a lot of other redistricting lines. And so we'll talk more about that. So who is redistricted state legislature? Well, it is the State House and the State Senate, the US Congress, the Public Service Commission that governs utilities, the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, and the courts. And we do this process by enacting laws. So these will be legislative instruments that will describe in infinite detail the boundary lines for each district. So how are we going to do that? First thing is we're going to actually, of course, use the newest 20 census data, which surveyed everyone who lives in this country in terms of where they were actually residing on April 1st of 2020. And as you might recall, we're a little bit late in this process for a number of reasons. Remember where we all were on April 1st of 2020. Well, most of us were locked down in our homes with the coronavirus. And so, you know, the process is normally to give you all an opportunity to fill out the short census survey online or by mail. And then people would go around and knock on doors and actually help fill out the survey for people that had not yet responded. That, of course, didn't happen last year when it was supposed to. It happened much later in the year because of the concerns with the coronavirus. In addition, there were a number of lawsuits filed, and so the whole process has been a little bit delayed. But here's what we learned in the census data. Louisiana has grown over the last 10 years about 2.74%, which sounds okay, you know, when you're considering, again, deaths and births and people who have moved in or out of the state. However, the growth rate in the is over 7%, and in the South, it's over 10%. And so although we are growing a little bit, we know that we're not growing at the rate that we should. And of course, I think there's a lot of things that we could do and need to do from a policy perspective that will help make Louisiana a much more attractive place for businesses to want to move to and for families to want to raise their kids. So as I mentioned, Congress then will look at you know, all of the population, assign one seat for each state, and then divvy everything up based on population. And so what we've seen is remarkable. For example, California and New York are seats for the first time in the history of their states. Texas is gaining 2 seats. Florida is gaining a seat. North Carolina, Colorado, Montana, and Oregon. And so we see definitely a shift, I think, in relation from left-leaning states to right-leaning states in this last census. So the number in Louisiana is in round numbers, 4.6 million people. You'll see 4,657,757,000 people is our population in Louisiana. And that has grown ever so slightly. You know, 10 years ago, we actually lost a congressional seat. And I think that if we continue along the same path, we will be at risk of potentially losing a seat 10 years from now, which would be terrible. Okay, you're going to see a lot of these, we call them red and green maps. And so the legend on these is color coded such that red indicates population loss, with the reddest being the more severe, and orange, being less severe. And green shows population growth, with the darkest green being the most growth during that time period. And you can see when we look at the last 4 decades, the trend has been fairly consistent. Growth along, kind of the I-10, I-12 corridor along, southern part of Louisiana, and losses up in North Louisiana, even most significant here in the last 10 years. All right, and this shows it, I think, just again, more specifically for the last 10 years. So you will see, particularly in our area, considerable growth in St. Bernard, St. Tammany, Tangipahoa, Livingston areas, et cetera, and significant loss of population in northern Louisiana. So this is laying the groundwork for the challenge ahead of us and drawing districts then that will be equal in population. So if we look at the parishes that have lost population, you will see them again, and you'll recognize these as primarily being in North Louisiana. The parishes that have gained the most population, again, Orleans has picked up 40,000. This is kind of the post-Katrina bump. Tammany has picked up 30,000. And you'll see Calcasieu, which of course is in the Lake Charles area, Lafayette, Ascension. These are all along the I-10, I-12 corridor. This will show you a little bit more specifically about the demographics of the North Shore area and how it's changed from 2010 to 2020. And this trend is happening really all around the country, where our population, our white population, has been declining. Our Black population, as well as Asian and American Indian and other, has been increasing. Part of this is also a phenomenon in that the Census Bureau gave us, 30 some odd choices in terms of how we would describe ourselves. And so there were voters this year, our residents had the opportunity to put yourselves in multiple categories. And so rather than dealing with, 30 something categories, every state made some decisions about how you would simplify those categories just for the purposes of managing the data and redistricting. And so, we've done that. And so for the most part, if anyone indicated that they had any part Black and any other races, they got lumped into the Black category, for example. And so I think the only folks listed in the white category are those that listed white as their only race. They did not list any other combinations. So part of the population shift is as a result of how the data was collected and all the options that people were given in terms of how they identified themselves. Similar trend here in St. Tammany, to drill down a little bit more. Loss in white population, slight gains in Black population. Okay, so what is the criteria for redistricting? There's certainly a lot of federal and state laws that guide our work. We will have to comply with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and all other federal and state laws. We also adopted a number of criteria that require us to have contiguous geography in our districts. So that means basically, you couldn't have part of your district over here and part over here. You basically have to have it where it's all connected, it's contiguous, as if you were drawing some weird shaped polygon with a pencil without picking it up off the paper. So it has to be contiguous. It also, to the extent practicable, it's supposed entire precincts included, where we're not going to divide precincts unless there's absolutely no other way to do it, and to do as few of that as possible, as little of that as possible. The redistricting plans shall respect established boundaries of parishes, municipalities, and other public subdivisions, as well as the natural geography of the state to the extent practicable. However, this criteria is subordinate to and shall not be used to undermine the maintenance of communities of interest within the same district. So that sounds like a lot of gobbledygook, I know. We talk about communities of interest. That basically means how groups of people might see themselves as having similar concerns or interest. So perhaps it's people in a community that are that have an Acadian background or an Indian background. Those folks that live down in the bayou areas say that, we don't want to be separated by this bayou and have that be a boundary line in our districts. We see ourselves as one community because we all fish, or we're all oystermen, or whatever it might be. And so, those are not defined boundary lines, those communities of interest, but it is how people see themselves. Mandeville and Covington perhaps see themselves as a community of interest, for another example. And so those issues will be considered, as well as natural, obvious political subdivisions of city boundaries and parish boundaries. And we have a process by which maps can actually be submitted for consideration to the legislature. You have to kind of meet a few of these rules. They have to meet all of the rules that we're talking about today, and you can submit those in a common delineated block equivalency file. The other thing that you have to do if you want to submit a map to the legislature, or if any member wants to propose a map through a legislative instrument, you have to assign the whole geography of the state. So for example, the St. Tammany delegation could not meet and work out how we believe the districts ought to be drawn in St. Tammany without also considering how they should be drawn throughout the rest of the state. Because as you'll see and start to realize, hopefully, is it's like a domino. So whenever you add people or take people away from a certain district, it affects the districts around you. And so you have to have a plan for basically placing all 4.6 million citizens in the state of Louisiana into a district. We also, the districts to be single member districts. Believe it or not, that hasn't always happened. In some municipalities, for example, this still does not happen. So perhaps you could have several members running at large in a district, and the top 2 vote getters would represent the entire city, perhaps. We don't do that in any of these redistricting plans that we're working on in the House, the Senate, the Public Service Commission, or BESI. We also have to have districts that are substantially equal in population. And substantially equal in population has been defined by the courts for these redistricting plans as being with 10% swing. So that's actually 5% too much or 5% too little, plus or 5% of what the ideal district populations should be. So the ideal district population, for example, would be if we took the 39 Senate districts and divided them into the total population, and you'll see that number ends up being something in the neighborhood of 119,000 people. Some districts could have plus 5% over that or minus 5% below that and still meet the redistricting guidelines. And we're also going to give due consideration to traditional district alignments to the extent practicable. So that basically means, we're not going to start with a plain sheet of paper and redraw everything from scratch. We're going to start with the districts as they currently are configured and work to modify those as we are able. The redistricting plans for Congress also shall have to be single member districts, and they have to be nearly equal to the ideal district population as practicable. The definition of this is slightly different than it is for the other redistricting plans that we're doing. When we say nearly equal, the congressional districts, I'm talking close to zero difference as possible. And so it is going to be in the case of the congressional districts that we will most likely have to divide precincts, because these are going to be really within, as close to zero as is the goal there, not 5% as we will do with all the other districts. Okay, so let's look at what we consider we call the malapportionment data. And this is taking the new census numbers and putting them into our current district boundary lines so you can see the work that we have left to do. So I'll start first with the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. You'll see here, again, these have to be plus or minus 5%. So you can see districts 3 and 8 are under that, and districts 6 and 7 are over that. We reside in District 1, represented by Mr. Garvey, Jim Garvey. So here's a map, and again, it's the traditional red and green legend that I've discussed earlier. So you'll see District 1, which affects St. Tammany. Even though St. Tammany has, close to or within the range, the plus or minus 5% range, does not mean that it will not get affected in this redistricting, because look at the significant area, so that they're all relatively equal in population, plus or minus 5%. So that means that, again, those District 6 will perhaps have to shrink in size to give up people to Districts 8, 3, and 2. Similarly, District 7 has too many folks. Districts 4 and 5, this is a trend you'll see everywhere. North Louisiana districts are in need of people. So, one way to do that, again, is to grow those districts geographically. The districts that have too many people, to shrink those geographically to try to get us in balance. Next, we'll look at the Public Service Commission. District 1 is short. That's not, sorry, District 1 is over by 8%. Okay, I think that should be, yep, that should have been in green. So District 1 is over by 8%. And you'll see that here on this map. And so that is the district that we are in. We're represented by Public Service Commissioner Eric Scrametta. And so we have some work to do here on these maps as well. Let's look at the congressional maps. All right, so here we have 6 US House members, and you will see the numbers here, roughly 40,000 or so short in districts 4 and 5, which are Congressman Johnson and Congresswoman Letlow in North Louisiana. District 1, we're represented by Congressman Scalise, is, in round numbers again, 40,000 over. And so we've got some work to do with the congressional maps. Here's what they look like, color-coded. So again, the goal is to get them as close to zero difference as possible. We don't have the plus or minus 5% ability in the laws governing the congressional maps. And so these are color-coded just to give you a sense of the degrees of overage or underage based on the population. So one of the hot discussion topics is, how do we manage the fact that we've lost so much population in districts 4 and 5 in North Louisiana? So they will have to, again, grow geographically to be able to accommodate that. There are some folks who have proposed some very different maps. Some perhaps would have one district running east-west across the I-20 corridor up in North Louisiana. The folks up there, of course, don't like that. They like having 2 congressional members. The folks in Lake Charles and Lafayette, there in District 3, see themselves as a community of interest. We've talked about that. They have joint chambers and see themselves as an economic development engine together. And so they don't want to lose their community of interest, let's say by giving population to District 4. And so those are some of the things that we are working to solve. And, been working very closely with the Congressional Delegation on this to get their ideas and then on how we should do it, as well as we're conducting a lot of public hearings around the state and getting a lot of input on this topic as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit here at the end. Okay, the Supreme Court. So the laws do not require the court system to meet the equal population standard, meaning, there's we call it one man, one vote principle. So one man, one vote would say that we want everyone's vote to be equal. What we see in the Supreme Court, for example, is that we have one district that is has about 400,000 people in it right now. That's District 7, held by Justice Piper Griffin. We have another district, District 5, by Justice Hughes in the Baton Rouge area, has 800,000 people. And so if you're a voter, let's say in District 7, perhaps the weight of your vote is twice as important as a voter in District 5. That would be, so the idea behind redistricting by population, we call it one man, one vote, for all of the other entities that we've been talking about, the state legislature, Congress, a public service commission, and Bessie, one man, one vote principle applies. It does not apply to the court system because the idea is the courts are not really representing you. They are interpreting the law, and that really shouldn't matter how many people they have in their district. Although some of the justices have indicated that perhaps it is a little bit of a workload issue. And they do have an interest in us considering redistricting the Supreme Court. And the legislature has the authority, the constitutional authority, to redistrict all of the courts. So we could do the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, the district courts, etc. You can imagine as you get to the district court level, it gets a lot more complicated. But those are certainly all on the table and something that the legislature consider. This is the Supreme Court map. Again, you'll see District 7 there in the New Orleans area being smaller, along with District 4 up in North Louisiana. That's Justice McCallum that was recently elected. We are here in District 1, St. Tammany is with Justice Crane. And you'll see that he also has, if you were going to balance the courts based on population, he would have too many folks in his district. All right, let's look at the state Senate, which is a little bit closer to home for me. So this just simply shows the districts in a variety of colors so that they don't to 25% of my district is in St. Bernard, Plaquemine, and a little bit of Orleans. So I basically go from I like to say from the Mississippi River to the Mississippi state line. It's a very large area geographically. I have an untold number of fish and oysters in my district, but also a lot of great people. So the ideal Senate population in the 2020 census is 119,429. And as I mentioned earlier, our goal is for every Senate district to be as close to that number as possible with a range of plus or minus 5%. So right now we currently have 10 of 39 districts are above the deviation, so they have too much population. 15 are below and 14 are about right. But as you'll quickly see, really pretty much every district is going to get changed in some way. So this is the Senate map. Again, green shows growth. Red shows a loss of population. So you'll notice the significant population loss issues in northern Louisiana. You'll see growth again, our area along the North Shore, Certainly see a little District 23 in the Lafayette area with growth, and districts, 28, 27 representing the Lake Charles area. So that's the challenge for us then. Now let's look at, back up and say, so again, there's two ways you can approach this. You can grow the districts specifically so that they take in more people, and shrink the districts that are green. But at some point you get to where the districts are so distorted. So think about, if you have to have contiguous boundaries and you're in a district that needs people, the only places you can go are to your neighboring districts. Well, if all of the districts that you border also need people, who are you going to take them from? And so it ends up being kind of a domino effect. And it's certainly much nicer to be in districts with too many people than too few. I can tell you that for sure. But one of the things that we are considering would be perhaps eliminating a district in North Louisiana and adding a district along the I-10, I-12 corridor, so that you don't end up distorting all of the districts quite so severely. The numbers will show, if you look at North Louisiana in the Senate, they have 10 Senate districts. They really only have population numbers to support 9. And so that is one of the options that's being considered, just from a very, 12,000 foot level. So these are the districts in the North Shore, just again, to give you kind of the ability to see those. So, I'm in District 1, you've got Senator McMath in District 11, Senator Mizell in District 12, have some portion of St. Tammany. Then over in Tangipahoa, we have Senator White comes into Tangipahoa along with Mizell and McMath. Senator Pope, District 13, also has a little bit of Tangipahoa, and you'll see District 18, Senator Lambert, all kind of circle the lake there on what we consider the North Shore. When you look at these in terms of red and green, you'll see part of our challenge. My district, District 1, has 9,200 people too many. District 11 next to me, McMath, has 32,000 people too many. His district is the one that's grown the most. And those of you that are sitting in traffic all the time in I-12 and all the connecting streets, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Senator White in District 6 has 13,000 too many. Senator Pope, District 13, 10,000 too many. District 18, Lambert, 18,000 too many. Senator Mizell, not quite as bad, but still has 2,000 too many. And so again, where are we going to move those people and how do we shrink the districts so that we can get much closer to the ideal number of 119,400. So that's the challenge before us. And again, one of the considerations could be adding a new district, in this area that would help absorb, some of the excess that we have in the North Shore area. And again, this is just zooming in a little bit more on St. Tammany. We've kind of talked about the issue. Senator McMath and I kind of split St. Tammany right now, kind of in the Lacombe area. We all sort of Beta Springs area with Senator Mizell. All right, same issue kind of exists with the House of Representatives. So this is just an overall map of the House. So you can see all the different districts. They have 105 districts. Their ideal population number, 4,359. And again, about a third of their districts are above, a third below, and a third are within the deviation, but will likely still all get affected. So here are the red and the green maps. It's not quite as bad for the House. They have smaller districts. And so they do have some districts that have grown up in North Louisiana, but still the large predominance of their districts have lost population. We see population growth in District 103 with Representative Garofalo. That's part of my district also. That's St. Bernard and Plaquemine. a lot of that, again, is the post-Katrina recovery. And then growth over here in the Mandeville-Covington areas that you all are familiar with, and on into Tangipahoa. Great growth in Lake Charles area, Lafayette area. That's largely due to the economic recovery, economic work being done over with the LNG plants, et cetera, in Lake Charles. We were really concerned about the data for the Lake Charles area because, as you know, between COVID and Hurricanes Laura and Delta, they were severely impacted all during the fall. And it was very difficult to go door to door counting people when their homes didn't exist. And so we were very pleased and happy that the numbers were as good as they were. So this shows the House districts, again, colored in ways that you can see them. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So District 76, I'll start over here on the far right-hand corner. 76 is held by Representative Owen. He has about 1,100 people too many. Representative Dubuisson, District 90, 900 people too few. 104 is Representative Hollis, 400 too few. Freeman, District 74, to the north of that, 1,500 too few. And Representative Nelson, District 89 on the lakefront, is just right. He's about 35 people over the ideal number, so he's just right. Representative Wright, about 15,000 too many, District 77. And District 73, our neighbor in Tangipahoa, Representative Wheat, 6,000 people too many. So you can see that's where the has been happening, and certainly part of why Senator McMath's numbers are so large. With the predominance of her district in Washington Parish, 5,000 too few. And so that's the challenge for the North Shore delegation. And again, looking at how to modify their district boundaries to get closer to equal population. And the St. Tammany maps, and we've kind of talked about that. So what are the next steps? So as I mentioned earlier, the Senate and Governmental Affairs Committee and the House and Governmental Affairs Committee have undertaken hearings, been to Monroe, Shreveport, and Lafayette. Our next stop will be in Alexandria on November the 9th, and we will be here in Covington on November 30th. And you'll see a lot of other cities. We're hitting all the major cities. And the purpose of these meetings is really to show some of this similar data and to ask for your input about how you would like to be represented. What do you see as your community of interest? These hearings have been really a tremendous commitment on the part of the legislature and have been very well received, I think, by the members of the public who've attended. So we're having between 150 and 200 people attend. The meetings are held from 5:30 to 8:30 at night to give people more of an opportunity to participate after work. And you'll see 30 to 35 legislators, a dozen staff members, lots of security. It is a big commitment because we care about what you think, and we want this to be a very open and transparent process, because this is basically going to affect how you will be represented for the next 10 years. And so I hope that you'll join us. We'll be at the Furman Auditorium on that November 30th date. You'll see this is our website. If you go to legis.la.gov, there will be that you can click on for redistricting on the left-hand side that will give you all the data that we're considering, all the census data, all the slides similar to what I've shown today, and just an opportunity to stay in touch with us. These redistricting public hearings are also broadcast live, so you can watch those from the legislative website. There'll be a lot of press there and a lot of coverage. And so we hope that you'll participate in giving us your input as to how to be represented. And so with that, I think I will stop and ask Jessica to help me with any questions that you all have submitted.
Thank you, Senator Hewitt. We do have some questions that came in advance, and some of them we'll go ahead and get to. I know we got quite a few on school board, on school system redistricting and the school board and everything else like that. And I know that's not your focus, but can you explain how that's probably going to work in our area?
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit. So just as we've talked about the congressional seats and the legislative, et cetera, how that is the legislative responsibility to redistrict, parish council, city council, school boards also have a responsibility to redistrict based on population. And so they're in the process of doing that. They don't have to wait for us to do anything because our work is basically unrelated. So they will take, let's say in the case of the school board, we know exactly what the population is in St. Tammany. They will divide that up by the number of districts and then work to change the district boundary lines in terms of which school board member will represent you. That does not affect where your child will go to school. So that is different. They have school boundaries in terms of what school your children will be sent to, depending on your neighborhood. And that is going to be different than your representation. So if you're interested in those things at the parish council, city council, school board level, I'd encourage you to plug in with those entities and follow their process. Most of them have begun that. They hired, redistricting advise them and give them some of the data they need to do that work.
Thank you. Another one that we had that came in from one of our participants is, has our St. Tammany delegation discussed and have know what potential redistricting will look like amongst themselves?
We've had some conversations. Certainly, you have to begin having some conversations, and it's helpful to the overall effort when areas, groups, regional areas can begin talking about that. But speaking for the Senate, I can tell you that we have not made any decisions whatsoever about that. Again, we want some public input into that process, but we have begun having some conversations. I would assume, my friends in the House have also begun having some conversations, but there haven't been any decisions made. The go forward plan, and I failed to say this at the end of the presentation, we are doing these listening sessions around the state early January. And then in January, the two committees will take all of this input that we've been receiving and develop some maps that we will put out to the public as our proposed maps for each of those entities that will be ultimately translated into legislative instruments. And that will happen in January. And we'll have a public hearing in Baton Rouge to launch those maps. And then most likely we'll be in a special session in February with the sole purpose of passing bills that will redraw the maps. Those instruments, those legislative instruments, will have to be approved or vetoed by the governor. If vetoed, then they could be considered for a veto override by the legislature. And if we ultimately do not do, quote, our job, which our responsibility is to get all the redistricting done by the end of 2022, no, by the end of 2023. And so we're going to get that done. We certainly have an interest in getting it done sooner rather than later for the congressional maps, because those members will be qualifying in July for the 2022 congressional races. And so know what the district looks like, where they're going to run. And so we'll be working on those and wanting to make sure that we get those done. The courts do not have a timeline because, they're not required to be redistricted based on population. The Supreme Court, for example, has not been redistricted since 1997, which is part of the reason why they have such huge differences now in their populations. So the legislature has the constitutional authority to be able to redistrict, but we're not under the same timeline as we are with all the other redistricting efforts.
All right, thank you. And you answered another question that had come in at the same time. Another question is, do we still have to maintain a minority district?
Well, federal and state laws deal a lot with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the idea behind that is to ensure that minorities have an opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. And so there are, lots of laws that deal with minority districts and the best way to do that. The maps that were drawn 10 years ago by the state of Louisiana had to go through what's called pre-clearance. So pre-clearance meant that the Department of Justice, the federal Department of Justice, had to approve our redistricting maps before we could take action in the legislature. So we're not under pre-clearance at this time anymore. But I say that the maps that we are currently working under were approved by the federal government. And so we view those as a pretty decent starting point. And we know that, we will be working to consider the majority minority districts that we have are, cases to be made for altering those numbers, either, up or down, depending on the population.
Thank you. Someone wanted to know if there were any changes for Region 9.
So Region 9 is a Department of Health. I think that was a Department of Health region. Again, we don't redistrict based on Department of Health boundary lines. Those are done really just to provide resources at the local level. So we're going to be looking at, again, the boundary lines in the State House and the State Senate, et cetera, and following the population numbers based on that. But because Region 9 is largely a North Shore entity, I would expect there to be some changes, but the Department of Health, I don't know that they're bound to do that, to redistrict based on population. So it could be something they may choose to do, but it's really not part of this process.
Okay, now this question is probably your biggest problem. How can we possibly achieve by law the redistricting requirement when over 50% of the state's entire population is in Southeast Louisiana?
Well, now you feel my pain. You know the challenge. You can see the challenge, and we can't control where people live, but we're bound by law to redistrict based on equal population, and so we're going to be working to do that. Again, you kind of have two options. You stretch the districts geographically that lost people. You shrink the districts geographically that have too many people, or you end up kind of moving districts from one part of the state to the other. I mean, that's really the only two ways that you can do it. And so we'll be considering all options. Everything's on the table right now so that people feel and actually do have equal representation.
And another one is, what problems surfaced previously when redistricting? How were they solved? And any problems identified for the proposed plan?
Well, the problems are kind of the same every 10 years. One of the biggest issues we had 10 years ago is that we lost a congressional seat. And so that's always tough when you're shrinking from 7 congressional seats to 6. So we did end up with 2 incumbents then that basically had to run against each other in a newly drawn district. And so that's never a very popular thing. And we're thankful that we're not in that situation this year. I think they did also, move some Senate and House districts from one part of the state to another because of the population shift. And those are difficult conversations as well. Nobody wants to lose a Senate district or a House district. It's certainly nicer to be on the receiving end of perhaps more representation. One of the other issues that we hear about around the state in our roadshow is, whether communities prefer to have multiple representing them, or they would really just prefer to have one go-senator. So there are different schools of thought on that. Some people prefer to have, let's say, maybe 4 different senators that have a part of their area, because now you have 4 people to call and perhaps 4 votes, on critical legislation. Other people would prefer to have, again, one go-to person where the predominance of their district exist in your area and, feel like they have maybe a little bit more sway with that particular member. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, and people are going to have different opinions. And we've been hearing that in our travels around the state. So, I would encourage you to think about that, how you all, again, see your communities of interest. I say you all, but us, all of us. And let's talk with the legislative delegation about your thoughts on the best way to do that. Of course, we have to do that consistent with where the population is. Sometimes our hands are tied, and it's not as easy to accomplish the things that you want to just because the population numbers are driving you to do something different. But it's a lot of different issues to balance. And there's really no one perfect map. We know that. And there will be, there's an infinite number of ways to draw what I believe are fair maps that meet all the federal and state laws. And so we're going to be working to do that to the very best of our ability.
Thank you so much. Those are all the questions we received today. Thank you for giving us all this information. It was a lot. And like I said, it is being recorded, and I'll send that out with a slide deck for everyone today, so you can go back and reference it. We do hope so you can join Senator Hewitt and her colleagues on November 30th at the Furman. We made an effort to have this event prior to that roadshow, so everyone could be informed. This is something Senator Hewitt and I have been working on since April, I believe, and it's just her schedule is so busy with all of this. I just want to remind everyone too, at the chamber, we do have 2 more webinars this week. Tomorrow at noon, we're doing one on recognizing changes in behavior, addiction and suicide awareness and resources. And on Thursday at 9 a.m., we're doing Learn the Facts about Camellia Bay Resort and Casino. So if anyone's interested in that, they can go to sttammanychamber.org and sign up for it. Again, thank you, Senator Hewitt. We appreciate your time today and all your information. And everyone have a great Tuesday. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.